So first, just focus your mind on an object of meditation for a couple minutes. You clear your mind and kind of check that you're comfortable, relaxed, ready to fill your mind with yeah, ideas and contemplation, hearing, contemplation, and meditation on emptiness, independent arising for an hour and a half. So it's very helpful now before you, especially when, when we are reading about or listening to teachings about or contemplating like difficult topics. It's very helpful just to clear the mind first, kind of, relax one's attention, create some space in the mind and in the heart. I guess you can also say not just intellectual kind of space, but also kind of emotionally. Um, just kind of relax and let the mind be open and vast and receptive and curious. Mm. So to do that, especially to relax and kind of create space in the mind, it helps just to focus our attention on an object of placement meditation, like the breath or the nature of the mind itself. And then also, as part of that, kind of deliberately just let go of everything else. No, stop trying to hold on to all the things, other strands flowing through our lives and other kind of responsibilities that we have to juggle all the time. So it can feel safe that for this hour and a half, you have time. Nothing else, I hope, is on your calendar for this time, right? So, yeah, kind of relax and enjoy that holiday, that treat that you've given yourself, and kind of let go of everything. Just focus the attention and be in the present moment. Mm. Thinking about preparing to for this session by focusing our attention and relaxing creating space in the mind. Um, yeah, in general, I mean, that's a good thing to do before you even read a Dharma book or before any meditation session you do, or if you, before attending, a lecture or even a puja or something. Um, yeah, sometimes, I don't know, I notice, um, especially when they're doing pujas, but even sometimes for classes and things, um, you see the way people kind of approach it is a bit, I don't know, it's it's a bit too much like another worldly activity, you know. It's important to recognize when we do a Dharma class or even just read Dharma book, watch a video, but anything or do our own meditation practice, anything that's part of our spiritual practice or Dharma practice, it's important to kind of um, cultivate a particular way of approaching those things. And so, and part of that, the way that, I mean, part of that, of course, is generating a positive motivation at the outset. But even like before that, even before you sit down or before you enter the room, like as you're, like if you're for, because most of you are online, so even as you're sitting down to, turn on your computer and logging into the Zoom room, and then just waiting for the session to start. Like we should try to make all of that part of our Dharma practice, or even as we're driving or walking to the gompa or the classroom and sitting down. We should try to do all those things in a bit with a bit more kind of a bit more mindfulness and a sense of presence of our own body, our mind, more awareness than we bring to ordinary things, right? Because that's part of Dharma practice is trying to cultivate control. Um, like the Buddha said, he summarized his teaching: do not commit any unwholesome action. Perfect every virtuous action. Subdue your own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So and so subdue your own mind. So we should approach any Dharma activity we do with a subdued mind. Um, and part of that is, I mean, it's difficult to subdue the mind, but it's a bit easier to subdue the movement of our body, our physical actions. So like um, when we, are just walking to a gompa or walking to a Dharma center, as we get out of the car and walk, we should try to, be a bit more mindful how we're walking, how we come in and take off our shoes, how we sit down. Because all of that is part of, subduing, becoming more, having more self-control, generating more self-control, no? And awareness and, I don't know, a kind of, but it also, the kind of dignity, and grace. Um, with an awareness of like the significance of what we're doing. Mm. So like if we, I mean, the opposite is if we, yeah, prepare for a Dharma activity with the kind of triteness or triviality, just kind of chatting and, you know, doing this and doing that and shuffling things around. It's like, it kind of makes the whole thing more, less meaningful in a way, less significant, less, powerful in a way, right? So that's one thing I notice. I notice, yeah, a little bit, in these last 4 months being at Dharma centers here in California and the West in general, compared to in the monastery. Like in the monastery, there's that's very much is a very strong part of the tradition. Like in a monastic setting, is like when you come to do, a Dharma, participate together in a Dharma activity, like you come with a certain dignity. Mhm. a certain dignity and a certain kind of respect. It's like a way of showing respect for the Dharma that you're going to engage in, for the community of other practitioners that you're going to engage with, and kind of holding the space is a good phrase that people, use a lot these days. Is like you come with a sense of the importance and the significance of this event, and you show that in the way you move and the way you talk, the way you sit, the way you wait. Now, um, mm, yeah. So then, yeah, to generate a positive motivation and remembering all the other sentient beings who our lives are interconnected with, those we have naturally have affection for, our family and friends. You can imagine seated at our left and our right and behind us. And then those we tend to have aversion towards, you can imagine seated in the front facing towards us. And then those we tend to have a neutral disposition towards and tend to kind of not consider much. Um, then we imagine seated all around us. So all the beings of the six realms in human form and reflect how our lives are interconnected with theirs in this life, both directly and indirectly in countless ways, and from life to life, countless past lives, and also will be in countless future lives now. And then remembering how all of these sentient beings are the same as oneself in wishing to be free from problems and suffering and misery and misfortune, sickness and loneliness and so forth. And the same as oneself in wishing to have well-being and happiness and friendship and good fortune, health and clarity. And so not only then wishing for, that what we do, whatever, or, what causes we create by engaging in this session are not only beneficial to ourselves, but also with gratitude, thinking of these countless other sentient beings, wishing that what we do is of the greatest possible benefit to them as well. And then recognizing that, our own good and the good of others are deeply interconnected. So then thinking in order to, um, make one's this life and countless future lives up to enlightenment of the greatest possible benefit to other sentient beings, then I myself must become enlightened. And in order to do that, I must realize emptiness and dependent arising. And therefore, I'll engage in this session. Mhm. Then we can do some of the prayers beforehand that we usually do. Mm. Compelled by great compassion, you taught the sacred Dharma to dispel all wrong views. To you, the Buddha Gautama, I pay homage. Do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect wholesome actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. This ground, anointed with the perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Dana Mandala Kanira Tayami. Shrink this a little bit. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to abide in equanimity, free from attachment to friends and anger towards enemies. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have happiness and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free from suffering and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to never be separated from the happiness which is totally beyond suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is totally beyond suffering. I myself will cause them to be never separated from the happiness that's totally beyond suffering. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I think we'll continue meditating a little bit first. Yeah. Let's just continue meditating a bit more. Mm. So just go back to, sorry, go back to placement meditation that you were focusing, the way you were focusing before the um, bodhicitta motivation. Mhm. The one thing, yeah, it's good to remember that I wanted to mention that we meditate on a little bit is, we'll continue meditating on emptiness in the way we were last week, but beforehand, I was thinking because of what I was saying about to prepare for the session by creating space in the mind. Mm. It's very especially important and relevant in meditating on emptiness. And there's a couple different ways to think about that. But one is, I think it's something people often miss in relation to emptiness or have a misconception about is that sometimes, especially in a course like this, where we talk a lot about what emptiness is and the different reasonings to establish it, why it's important, and how to meditate on it, it can start to sound like almost like emptiness is something we're making up and then trying to, like, kind of like you would create a sculpture or something, like building it up from clay. Um, or like, like you would bake a cake, like mix different ingredients together and then bake it and then come out with something. It can kind of seem like that with many different Dharma topics and, emptiness included. But it's so important to realize, to understand about meditating on emptiness that, this wisdom, understanding emptiness, yes, that is something we're trying to develop. But the actual object of that wisdom, the truth that is understood by the mind meditating on emptiness, the emptiness itself, that's something that is not created by anyone. That's just the nature of ourselves as a person, is the nature of, all the inanimate things that were around us, the chairs we're sitting on, the floors that we're sitting on, the planet Earth, the walls of our house, our clothes, all the parts of our body, other people, the sound, of our voices, the sensations of our, our breathing. Like everything that exists, its nature is to be empty. Empty of inherent existence, right? Not empty like non-existent, but empty of inherent existence, means empty of existing as an independent, isolated thing by its own power. And so that, and the opposite of that, right, is that things and the way things do exist is as dependently arisen, dependently arising phenomena, or dependently related phenomena. And that's not something like the Buddha just made up, or we're trying to just convince ourselves is the case. Rather, that's just the way things have always been from beginningless time. That's the way they're now. That's the way they'll always be. So sometimes when we meditate on emptiness, instead of trying to think about a lot of reasonings, it's good just to create space in the mind and just look at, how things are. How do I exist in the moment? And just let go of all of our different concepts and thoughts and just observe, nakedly in the present moment. Like how do I exist? How do other things exist? What's going on here? And try to look at emptiness kind of that way. Not as something we arrive at through a process of reasoning, although that's one way to approach it, but just as something that's already there if we just stop and look. Mm. Mm. And so, yeah, although it can be, because emptiness is so subtle and is a mere lack of um, inherent existence, it can be it's a little difficult to know what we're looking for or what to try to focus the mind on. But one thing that's extremely helpful and much easier to do to get insight into emptiness is just to look at dependent arising, to look at all the different types of subtle transformation and change, the way things in each moment, countless different things are interacting with each other, just in one's own experience, right? Without thinking far afield or far outside of ourselves. Just looking within our own bodies, and more subtle than that, looking within our own minds, our own awareness as it emerges with time in the present moment. And just look at, yeah, the kind of this dependently related arising that is our own, human experience. And then seeing how within that, there's really nothing that's fixed. There are patterns, but even within those kind of patterns, everything is changing. So just try to focus on that for a minute or two. The experience of dependent arising. Mm. Sometimes when you're just going about, ordinary daily activities, especially, I don't know, it's good to kind of bring this awareness of dependent arising. Just remember and just be aware in the present moment of how, things are arising. They're changing, and causes are giving rise to effects. Those effects themselves are causes giving rise to, other effects, subsequent moments. All the things we see, and then the sounds we hear. Sounds we hear is very easy, because sound is changing so quickly, even more quickly than like water. I mean, water also, when you look at a body of water, it just shows a change very obviously because it's never still. But even the land is changing like that. All the physical, the buildings, cars, our own bodies are all changing like that all the time, just at a slower rate. But sometimes when you're, yeah, just going about your daily activities, especially in moments like when you're kind of stuck for a moment, you can't do anything, you have to wait, like sitting at a red light at an intersection or standing in the grocery line, when you got your groceries together and you go to check out and then there's a line and you just have to stand there for a while. Or in the bank or, yeah, in a doctor's office or something. Sometimes in those moments, it's good instead of kind of I don't know. In the mind, often we can rush. So one thing I notice about uh, yeah, most people like here in the U.S. compared to India, where I've been living for a long time. In India, especially in the villages where I was living, uh, in the countryside. Yeah, yeah. So, but then it doesn't. Okay. We're changing the battery. They're probably getting there. So now just be aware of dependent arising. See, my amplified voice was dependent on the battery. Now the batteries are dead. I've been feeling a lot of that. A lot of what? Dependence arising. Oh, good.
How's that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I was saying as I was reflecting on dependent arising in these kind of moments, during the day when I feel like it's so helpful to just have generate that awareness because I notice people here rush a lot more than like where I was in India. There's this kind of, yeah, there's this kind of addiction to like speed and productivity. Like people drive fast, people, kind of walk, people do things kind of fast. And I know I feel like it's kind of contagious. It's like there's an inertia that everyone has that kind of contagious. So sometimes when you suddenly just have to stop and wait, it's almost like painful to be sitting at a red light or have to stop at the stop sign. Like nobody really wants to stop at the stop sign. Everyone wants to kind of roll through, right? You feel like. Um, but in those moments when you're suddenly just kind of there, wherever, aware of yourself. It's very good. It's very good practice just to remember, think like, okay, I'll just be aware of dependent arising. you know, be aware of what's happening in the moment. Because there's so many things that are happening every moment that because we're just, it's like I also see, people, the way we hike, the way you walk through a park or hike down a trail. Many people, when they're hiking, they're just set on like, going, they have to go like maybe 10 miles today and just going there as fast as they can and not seeing all the things around, just looking at the trail or looking at their watch or just looking ahead and going and not being aware of like the whole point to me the whole point of hiking is to be aware of the trees and the land and the leaves and everything that's going on in that environment, right? um, so yeah, meditating on dependent arising and emptiness is a bit like that. Instead of just rushing through each moment, trying to find moments in the day and especially when we're meditating, where we can just kind of relax and be aware of, the deeper, the fundamental kind of way that things are, that we are in that moment. Mm. Oh yeah, I need the mic. Okay, go ahead. I can repeat it also into this mic. Oh.
Yeah, the thing that I get really confused about sometimes is I understand dependence arising, but when I start thinking of emptiness,
Mhm.
I'm just feeling like, is it just the total opposite of dependence arising, or is it something on its own? Are we just saying, oh well, everything's dependence arising, so why even think of emptiness? Just stick with the dependence
Mhm.
arising constantly.
Mhm.
Like, what is I mean, I guess it's a good to keep on realizing, yeah, I can't find anything hasn't that doesn't have some connection with something.
Mhm. Could you all hear Glenn's question online? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So that was a very good segue to what I want to present for today. So I'll explain in relation to your question. Well, I'll go to the slides I wanted to go through today, and I'll explain. So the larger question, just to restate, go ahead and make sure I've got it right, is, um, yeah, why is emptiness important? Why not just stay with awareness of dependent arising? And how does emptiness relate to dependent arising? Is it just the opposite, or is it kind of something else that we're supposed to try to be aware of? So how's it related? How is emptiness related to dependent arising? And kind of why is it important or helpful, right? More or less? Yeah. Okay. Ladon, you have your hand up, I see also.
Yes, I would like to add just things are like we can see that things are dependent arising, like they arise depending to each other. And that's why there's emptiness. Emptiness let things arise like depending to each other.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. That emptiness is like the possibility for things to interact with each other, right? So that, because when we talk about emptiness, and maybe, yeah, when we talk about emptiness, it's not just like nothingness, but it's rather things being ourselves and other things being empty of existing by their own power, right? And so, I think we don't, yeah, we need to try to imagine a bit. What would it be like if things existed really by their own power or from their own side? Um, like if we as a person, if we existed like uh, from our own side, it would mean like what we are as a person and how we exist, both in our body, like the way our body is and the way our body is from moment to moment, the way our mind is from moment to moment, is all a self-contained system. This is one way to think about it. It's like a totally self-contained system. And so if we exist inherently, like from our own side, then then it means everything about us has to be just determined by our ourself alone, totally independent of reference or effect from anything else, right? So then it would mean essentially like it's impossible for us to interact with anything else. And not just us as a person, like everything would be like that. Like if this cup was, the cup as it is from its own side, it would mean it couldn't have causes. There couldn't have been something other than it that became it, or something other than that made it. It would have to just exist, by its own side. So in a way, it's like, well, why is that important? Like, that's okay. Well, the way why it's important is because we habitually grasp at ourself as existing like that, and we habitually grasp at other things as existing like that. So now, and that's what brings me to the slide that I want to go to. Right. So I'm going to go there now, and yeah, and then I'll try to clear it up a bit. Okay, so this is where I want to start today. What is, okay, hold on, I have to sort out that's where we were last week. I have to sort out my PowerPoint first. I have to close this one, I think. Okay, now we're on track. So, I mean, actually what we're doing initially is, okay. Okay, good. So first, I think I didn't introduce this verse, but these two verses before by Nagarjuna. So I just want to introduce these two verses, and then then we'll review a bit what we went over last week, and then continue. So these are two verses His Holiness has suggested that we use to meditate on emptiness every day. And so Nagarjuna says, a person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them as a group together. What person is there other than these? Right? So basically, he's looking through the parts of a person. Right? There's the part of our body that is like more to do with the earth element, like our bones, our teeth, and then the parts of the body that have to do with the water element, like the liquid, our blood and our hormones, the fluids in our body, our saliva, and so forth. Then the parts of our body that have to do with that are more like the fire element, the heat of our body, and the heat of digestion, and the heat that keeps our body warm, and so forth. And then have to do with the wind element, the movement, right? The kind of and the subtle energy that moves through the body, and the breath moving through the body, right? And then space. There's space within the body that allows for movement between things. We can even think the space in the atoms that make up our body, right? Between the electrons and the nucleus, the protons and neutrons. There's a lot of space. It's 99% space, right? So saying the person, and then also consciousness, right? And then there's also consciousness, all of our conscious experiences. So what he's saying is, what am I as a person? If we ask, what am I as a person? I'm not the earth element of my body. I'm not the water element. I'm not the fire element, the air element, or the space. Even I look at my mind, I'm not just reducible to my mind because I have a body, right? I have a mind and I have a body. I'm the possessor of my body and mind. So I'm not any of those individual parts. And even if you take that whole collection together, I'm not just that collection of parts, because I'm the thing that possesses each of that. I'm the thing that possesses that entire collection and all those parts. Um, and because I'm not a collection of things, I'm just one thing. I'm one person, right? Um, so he's saying, what person, and then what person is there other than this? If we look separate from all those parts, then what person is there that's separate from all of those? You can't find, there's nothing to point to as I. If you leave aside my entire body and mind, then there's nothing left to point to and say, well, that's me, right? And therefore, the person doesn't exist. As a person, we don't exist from our own side as an independent thing. We exist as something imputed upon this whole collection of parts. But again, in relation to Glenn's question, well, why is that important, right? Why not just try to understand how we're composed of all these parts and we exist independent in relation to all these parts of us as a person? But then Nagarjuna goes on to talk about how to meditate on the emptiness of the selflessness of phenomena. Whereas the first verse is about the selflessness of the person or persons. The second verse is about the selflessness of phenomena. And here the phenomena he's talking about primarily is each of these different parts of us as a person. He says, just as the person is not real, and their real is synonymous with inherently existent or existing from its own side. So just as a person is not real or doesn't exist from its own side, due to or because of being a composite of six constituents, right? There were six above, right? The earth, water, fire, wind is four, and then space and consciousness is five and six. So just as a person doesn't exist as an independent entity from its own side because it's composed of these six constituents, so, or likewise, each of those constituents also is not real due to being a composite. So each of those constituent parts, like the earth element of the body, or we could think our body, it's also not, doesn't exist from its own side because it's also made of parts. And then even one part of our body, say our heart, is also not existent from its own side because it's also made of parts. It has the valves and the chambers and all the cells that make it up and so forth. And then even one of those cells, it doesn't exist from its own side because it's also made of parts, right? And it's something imputed upon that set of parts, which they're continually changing. Even, as whatever scale we go down to, even the scale of molecules or atoms or subatomic particles, they're all the same. And even consciousness itself is made up not of parts in terms of direction, physical parts like with a northeast, southwest, or top or bottom, or so forth. But consciousness, it's made up of parts in time, moments in time where it's transforming. So just as a person is not real due to being a composite of the six constituents or constituent parts, so each of those constituents also is not real due to being a composite, due to being made up of parts. But now, so what we looked at this last week, the So last week we started on the 4-point analysis, this main method to meditate on emptiness. And the four points, or the 4-point analysis, the first of those 4 points, the first point is to look at what is to be refuted or negated. And that's what relates to your question. Like, why is this kind of idea of emptiness of important, and especially emptiness of what? Okay, emptiness of something existing from its own side. Well, why is that important? So that I'll come back to. But but that's what we look at. What is, because we're not, again, like I was saying at the beginning, when we meditate on emptiness, it's not like we're trying to make up something that's not already there. We're trying to see something that is a deep nature of the way things are. That's always been like that from beginningless time. It's like that now. It'll always be like that. But we usually just don't see it, right? Um, um, yeah. But that's important because that not seeing the nature of things, the empty nature of things, it leads to problems, right? So we'll look at that again in relation to this first step. But just to summarize or review these 4 points, the first is, I mean, actually the technical term is identifying the object of negation. But a simpler way to say it is looking at what is to be refuted or negated. And then what are the full set of possibilities? If that thing to be refuted, if it existed, it would either have to exist in this way or this way, one of two ways. And then why? So the thing to be negated is an inherently existent self or person. And then the two set of possibilities are that if an inherently existent person exists, it either has to be one with the aggregates, the parts of us as a person, or it has to be something separate, different from those, right? And then we eliminate both of those, look at both of those possibilities. So in C, or the fourth step, we look at why the person is not inherently one with the aggregates, right? So why the person and aggregates are not inherently the same. And then in the fourth, or D, why the person and the aggregates are not inherently different, right? And then we see how that type of person, which actually we innately grasp at, right? It doesn't exist. And so the conclusion is that kind a person doesn't exist in that way at all. And so it's totally empty, right? That's the conclusion. So yeah. So here, what is it? What am I saying here? The person is, yeah, I think I'll just skip that. And maybe I'll just summarize without, spending time reading through what's here on the slide. Actually, I don't know. I won't even, I'll just click it off. Um, Basically, the reason, emptiness is important is because what Buddha is saying is like, why do we suffer? Why do we have suffering experiences? Because we've created karma, right? We engage in actions that are harmful to others, like lying or cheating or stealing, slander, and so forth. We engage in actions that are harmful, like getting angry and saying something mean to someone. No. So and that so so we create negative karma, and then that ripens as suffering experiences for us. But then the question is, well, why do we create negative karma? Why do we engage in actions that are harmful to others or harmful to ourselves? And the Buddha's answer is, well, because of afflictive emotions, because we get angry, we get jealous, because we feel hurt or we feel lonely or unhappy, and then that leads us to do things, to lash out or do things that are harmful. So mainly through the force of anger and attachment, right? We want something very badly. We're very attached to something being a particular way, and then we don't get it the way it doesn't. Things don't happen the way we want, and then we get upset. We get unhappy, upset with ourselves, upset with others, angry, and then that leads us into doing something harmful. But then, why do we have anger and attachment? Why do we have those afflictive emotions? Because we have this kind of obsessive concern for ourself and our own story and our own identity. And this is our ego. We have an ego that wants this and doesn't want that. Like you see little kids. With little kids, it's very clear. No, adults, we learn to like mask it a bit more, right? Play games and kind of hide it because it's, it's not nice. But with little kids, they don't, they're just much more honest and open, right? And they very much, you can see sometimes, how they're like, oh, I want that. They just see something, and because of whatever understanding they have, they get very attached to it in the moment. And then if for some reason they can't have it, like I see this drama in the almost every time I go to the grocery store, like or Trader Joe's, especially like where there's a lot of children and their parents there. You see this drama play out. Like kids are going in the cart, riding down the aisle, see something, oh, I want that, and then the parent starts to try to gently explain why maybe can't have that, and then some they go along and some they're like, no, they start to get really upset. No? And that's a perfect example of like this sense of like self that's very strong, and then seeing something and then wanting it um, very strongly, and then when we can't get it, getting upset about that. So Buddha's saying, well, why do we get caught up in that kind of emotional drama anyway? And he's saying the fundamental thing is that we have this totally exaggerated sense of self, right? And so we, instead of seeing ourself as a dependent arising, we see ourself as something exists independently by its own power from its own side. And we believe that. Whereas it's not true. We believe there is an independent self that just has its own kind of essence, exists by its own power from its own side, just as it is. And then since we believe that, then we think that self is more important than anything else in the world. And then we get attached to what that ego wants and averse to what it doesn't want, right? So that was the first part of the meditation last week, which yeah, which we can, why don't we just repeat now for just a couple minutes, no, a few minutes. And so what we do is here, and that's what I have noted here. What we do is we think of, um, yeah, yeah. Last week, if you remember, I asked you. There's different ways to try to see how that sense of self exists just innately already. But last week, do you remember the kind of situation we looked at? It's what's written here, especially at times when we have generally at times when we have strong disturbing emotions, right? But last week we looked specifically at an instance where someone falsely accuses us of doing something wrong, where someone criticizes us or accuses us of doing something. Yeah, I hope you all remember that. It was just 6 days ago, 7 days ago. Um, yeah.
Mhm.
So why don't we start with that? Just review, try to remember that. So what we did, yeah, just sit, focus your attention inward, and then think of some situation in the past where someone accused you of doing something wrong, either accurately or falsely, right? Mm. And check how the self appears. Is there a stronger sense of self in that moment when there's a kind of defensiveness, thinking, how could you say that about me? Mm. But another way to check is just think of, when any strong kind of afflictive emotion arises, either we get irritated and angry or very jealous of something or very worried, then in the moment, so try this now, right? Just look at a different kind of situation, just when clearly the mind is disturbed about something by some emotion. And how does the self appear at that time? Does it appear more strongly? And does it appear like it's something real just from its own side? Or does it appear like it's a dependent arising? So do that now. Try to think of some situation when clearly like a disturbing emotion, you experienced in the past, kind of put yourself in that situation again, and with a corner of the mind, observe how the self appears. And especially with this question in mind, does the self appear to be just something existing kind of in and of itself by its own right, like as an independent thing? Or does it appear to exist as a dependently arising, something changing and dependent upon parts and our idea of self in that moment? Mm, okay, so then relax your attention. Yeah. I guess basically, I mean, I was kind of spend a lot of time going roundabout answering your question, Glenn, but I was trying to think, if you try to answer it in a short way, like why is emptiness important? Basically in Buddhism, because Buddha's saying, it's kind of like asking, well, why are so many people so selfish, right? It's because they believe the self to be this real thing that exists independent from anybody else. And that's why. That's why they're so selfish, because they take that appearance of the self as an independent thing to be real, and it's not, right? As a person, we're deeply interconnected with others. You can see most people who even know nothing about Buddhism, right? If many people, they know nothing about Buddhism, but you see with especially like many people who care about nature a lot, they naturally seem to generate a sense of interconnectedness with others. Or people in professions like teaching or mental health work or even medical profession, people in like where you have to work a lot with other people and you see kind of I don't know, the emotion, the inner lives of people you work with a lot. That people seem to, there's many ways people can generate a sense of deep interconnectedness with others. Some people by having parents, by being parents, becoming parents and having children, they just kind of seem to become more sort of loving and in a universal way. Some people by having near-death experience, um, they suddenly cherish just being alive and cherish others more. Even some people, there's an overview effect. Some people, like some astronauts, by going into outer space and seeing Earth from distant outer space and realizing like we're all kind of inhabiting this little kind of dot in this vast, empty, and dead space, then they feel much more interconnected with others, called the overview effect. Um, so there's different ways, but that people through a deep awareness of dependent arising, especially personally as a person, that they reduce this kind of habitual grasping at an independent self that lives in like competition to everyone else or in comparison to everyone else. It makes us kind of selfish. But that's kind of that's what we're talking about when emptiness. But it's not just emptiness of the person, everything. We see other things like I think I was speaking about in one earlier session, when things we're attached to or things we're averse to, we tend to think that they are the way we perceive them from their own side, right? Forgetting our role in that the generation of that perception. But anyway, I want to stick with the analysis here. So if you remember last week, I'll skip to the next one actually. Oh yeah, I think I'm not sure yeah, we did this last week, but there's the full set of possibilities. So this I want to, yeah, explain a little bit and then we'll meditate a little bit on again.
Yes,
Yeah, again, I don't know, somehow I don't feel like reading through the slides. I'll
yes.
just
Can
explain.
I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah, you have a question? Sure, Madhu.
My question is, I think fundamentally, when you have, how can you not have any expectations? When you have certain let's say you're a parent and you expect that your child is has meets certain expectations as a student. They have to be punctual, they probably wear a uniform, they go to school on time, they come back on time, they're a good student.
Mhm.
How can you not have expectations and still realize emptiness? My point is, how can you try to not grasp at the fact that they have to be good student while still understanding that that you're not separate from them or they're not separate from you? I just don't understand how can emptiness and expectations exist at the same point in time.
Um, Easy. I mean, it's so easy. Um, Not to say you don't, oops, what happened? My connection went out. 1 minute.
We can hear you. I
Oh,
can
you
hear you.
can? Okay. Yeah, I can't see you anymore. But it's okay. It'll connect again. Um, no, emptiness is not saying like we shouldn't have um expectations or there's not like there's not a good way. It's there's still like a good way to act and a not good way to act. Like within emptiness, you know,
Hmm.
you think like Buddhist morality. I mean, you're talking about expectations and a student or your child or something. But you
Any
think about, but
expectation.
it's
Yeah.
all the same. Like think about like in as a Buddhist, you know, we would expect ourselves to not kill and not steal and not lie, right?
Right.
It's not that those things don't matter anymore, because it's um, remember, like those things all still matter because dependent arising still exists, right? It's not
Un,
like
uh,
emptiness is not nihilism, right? It's things are empty because they're dependent arising, right? If things are not independent arising, then there's nothing, right? Then that would be nothingness, but that's not emptiness. Emptiness is emptiness of things not being dependent arisings, right?
I see. It's emptiness of your own self, but that doesn't mean your self can go and
No,
it can
we
be
have to, it's
immoral.
very important to distinguish between the self that exists and the self that is empty. Okay,
Yes, that's
we don't
exactly. I
exist.
want to understand that.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes,
let me just try to sum that up in just a few words,
yes.
right? The self that does exist is a self that is composed of parts, all the parts of our body and all the parts of our mind, the different, different kinds of experiences we have and the different moments unfolding through time. And then, but then, okay, but none of those parts of our body is the I, right? They're all parts of I. None of the parts of the mind, none of our mental experiences is I, the person whose mind that is, right? They're all just
Mm,
parts of the mind. So then
mm,
what is the person, what when we look for what is the person who has a body and all the parts of the body? What is the person that has a mind and all the parts of the mind? Because
mm,
you can't separate the body and mind out and then find that person somewhere else.
mm.
That person only exists in with reference to the body and mind. So how does that person exist independence upon the body and mind? As something labeled upon it. We have as an idea. Like we observe our body. I mean, our body exists in the same way, but just stick with the person for a minute, and then we can go to the body, right? But we observe. It's like, why do I say I'm sitting? or I'm talking.
Mm.
First, when we think I'm sitting, first I observe like what my body's doing. It's sitting in a chair, and then I say I'm sitting. But apart from the body, there's no person, there's no I that's also sitting, right? And yet the
Mm.
body is not I, right? But yet in relation to the body, we say I'm sitting. Why? Because I'm associated with this body, right? And I label I upon the body. So it sounds so strange to say my body's sitting, right? It sounds as if like, like it's not part of me. Well, you say I'm sitting, and yet the body is not the I, right? So and then when the same way when we say I'm thinking or I'm feeling something, it's there's a mental experience of thinking, of feeling, and that mental experience itself is not the I. It's part of the I. But so how does the I exist? As something labeled upon this collection of parts, of the parts of our body and parts of our mind. And what do we mean by that? I mean, there's so many different examples of labeling, but maybe just to mention a couple that could help illustrate is like, like think of like a dollar bill. A dollar bill, like what is it? It's a piece of very sophisticated paper with some kind of pattern printed on it that says like I owe you. No, the American government promises to pay you the equivalent of this. But that piece of paper and that ink and the print and stuff, it has very little value. Especially think about $100 bill. Like it's not worth $100, right? The actual physical thing is it has a very little value. And yet but where does the value come? It's like, and yet what we label upon it like $1 or $100. But it's just and we label but we look at it as if that piece of paper is $1. But actually, like, well, we all have, online accounts where we transfer money all the time and there's no dollar bills like flowing anywhere. It's just digits, right? That represent a value of $1. So like where is $1? You cannot find it anywhere. Like the dollar bill that's why we say dollar bill, because it's not $1. But $1 is just like we come up with an idea and label upon a basis that's suitable. So as a society, we've decided that $1 bill is a suitable basis to label $1 on that, and thereby it functions in that way, right? But if you look within that, you can't find like $1. It's not there. It's a similar, and another example is like a letter. Like think of I mean, I don't have here, but like the letter Z, or any letter on a printed page. Like it's just an arbitrary symbol, right? And as a convention that this symbol, like the letter Z with this, the one line and then a slanted line, like one horizontal line, then one slanted line, and one horizontal line going the other way, that's going to represent the sound Z, Z, right? But it could be any symbol, right? And then, so upon that shape, then we label the letter Z. But the Z doesn't exist from the side of the shape at all. If you look, that top line is not a letter Z. The slanted line is not. The bottom line is not the letter Z. That collection of three lines together itself is not the letter Z. If it was, then anyone who saw that should be able to see and recognize Z like right away, but they don't. Like when a child who hasn't learned about language or the alphabet, when they see that, it's just a random shape, or someone who is not familiar with Roman script, it's just a random shape, right? But then we learn that, oh, this symbol represents this sound za, and the name of this is the letter Z. But gradually we become so habituated to that understanding. When we see that letter on a page, it looks like that symbol is a Z from its own side, independent of mental imputation, right? So that symbol being the letter Z is something we impute upon it, right? And it's a suitable basis to be the letter Z because there's a common agreement in society, in our English-speaking society, or that's what that symbol will represent, right? Similar to the dollar, that's what that piece of paper with that kind of printing, that will represent a dollar. But I mean, those two examples are a bit easier to see how imputation works because they're both man-made things. With natural things like water or earth or trees, it's a bit more difficult, but the same reasoning holds. So that's what we do with relation to ourself. We have, we do have it. So the self that exists is like, yeah, we do have a unique collection of parts of our body that's unlike anyone else's. And we have a unique experience of all the parts of our body in that we experience it as the inhabitant of that body from within it. Like we don't experience, we can see others, people's bodies from the outside, right? From the outside, but we can't experience what it's like to be in that body from the inside, right? We have that unique. So that's part of what makes us unique. But yet our body is changing all the time. Like the air is coming into the body and parts of our body are going out to the environment. And then our minds also, it's the same. Our minds we experience from the inside. We don't experience anyone else's mind from the inside. Nobody else experiences our mind from the inside. So there is like a person, but the person that does exist is made up of all these different parts. And then up on that collection of parts, we label I. In a way, I is like a story that we have about this experience. And as a continuum through time. And that's okay. That's all fine. And so that I does stuff, it creates karma, experiences results of karma. Other people have expectations of it. It has expectations of other people, and everything works, right? But the problem comes when we innately have this sense of like some essence of a self that just is as it is. It's not any of the parts. It doesn't depend upon any parts of the body. Doesn't depend upon any parts of the mind. It just is there. And it's this real kind of concrete sense of self. And we believe that exists. And thereby we have a sense of being separate from everybody else and everything else in a way that we're actually not, right? And thereby we have a sense that actually this I that I kind of that is an exaggeration of what's really there, right? What's really there is completely a dependent arising thing upon which we have an idea of self and that self exists. But then we exaggerate the kind of independent reality of that self and believe in that, right? We create a kind of independent and then we grasp it and we believe in that. And that creates this kind of tension between us and everybody else. And we innately think that the one that I am is more important than everybody else, right? And that's where then that leads into all kinds of problems, right? And all kinds of disappointment because we try to please. Because then once we have that concrete sense of self, then we have our likes and dislikes. They also feel very real, like they exist from their own side, and then we're continually trying to kind of satisfy the kind of perceived needs of this inherently existent self, and it's impossible, to do. Um, yeah. So that's yeah. But in short, yeah, there's no contradiction between everything being empty of existing from its own side and us having expectations that others be responsible in the way they study or the way they use their lives, right? Actually, they're totally compatible. Um, Again, think what would it mean if things were not empty of existing from their own side? If things existed independently, then there could be no relationship between them. As soon as we have, another person affects us, we affect another person, we both change in that experience. In that moment, we change, right? Totally change. Not like everything about us changes, but we're a different person than we were. I mean, every moment we're all changing, right? Each of us. We're not really ever the same person as we were just a second before, right? If we look at the subtle workings of our body and our mind, like we can see that. Yeah, but let's go back to the analysis for just a bit. Um, yeah, what am I? Um, Oh yeah, I wanted to just focus on this because I think I skipped this step last week, and then next week is our last session for this, right? So next week we'll finish the 4 point analysis. But here, one point we have to make sure we get clear. So at least, yeah, I'll try to just explain it briefly. Is that if so in the first step, when we look at when the sense of self appears very strongly, right, as it existing from its own side. So in the second step, the idea is if the self exists like that as something independent from its own side, then it either has to be one with my aggregates, the collection of body and mind, or another name for this collection is the basis of imputation, this collection of parts based upon which we impute an I, right, self. Like we don't impute our I upon the table, right? We don't impute I upon the laptop in front of us. We don't impute I upon another person, right? We only impute I. What do we impute I in dependence upon? Our own body and our own mind, right? This collection of parts. But yet, our arms, our hands are not us, our legs are not us, any of our organs are not us, any of the cells of our body are not I. Any of the thoughts, individual thoughts or memories or feelings or moments of awareness are not the I. The I is something we impute upon that whole collection, right? Remember, the one who possesses the body and possesses the mind. So, but here, so there's this collection of parts, like the collection of the parts in us. So we can call that the aggregates, like our aggregates, or our basis of imputation. And so this is what this phrase, basis of imputation, means. This whole collection of parts, and each of them, upon which we impute I, right? So, so the second part of the analysis, which is the two possibilities, is that if when we in the first step, when we have this sense of a concretely existing I, if that I really exists in that way, then it either has to be one with this collection of parts, or the basis of imputation, or something different from that, right? If it's one with that collection, it has to be inherently one with that collection. If it's inherently one with that collection, it means it's identical to, it's not different whatsoever. It is that collection. So that's the first possibility. The second possibility is if it's different from that person, it has to be inherently different. Sorry, if it's different from that collection, our basis of imputation, the collection of our body and mind, or our aggregates, right? If the I is different from the aggregates, it has to be inherently different from the aggregates. If it's inherently different from the aggregates, it can have no connection with them whatsoever. They're totally unrelated. You could think like a cow and a horse in a field, no, or like I don't know, um, like Land of Medicine Buddha and the White House. I mean, even that there's a bit of relationship, right? But they would have to be totally unrelated. So these are so these are the two possibilities. Like if in the first step, when we look for the object of negation, this I that seems to exist from its own side, if it exists that way, it either has to be one with our aggregates or different from our aggregates. And so here's the main point of that second step is like, well, why is that? Why is that it has to be one with different? And we can think about this way. Um, well, yeah, maybe this is the best way to think about it. Easiest way is there's different ways, but in short, it's because of this. Think of all the things that exist in the world, right? Among which, I as a person, we're one of those things, right? So is it true that everything that exists in the world is either you or not you, right? Yeah, that's one. I mean, in short, it's like, I mean, this is the case for anything. Like if we just think of ourselves as a person, everything else that exists in the world is either oneself or not oneself, right? Another way we could think about it is take any object. Like I can take this clock. This is the clock on my desk. Like everything that exists in the world is either this clock or not this clock. There's only two possibilities, right? Anything that exists, any in the world, anywhere in the world at any time in the past or in the future or ever will exist in the future, either is one with this clock or is different from this clock. There's no third possibility, right? And so we can take any object, just I don't know, just do a mental kind of experiment with something around you in your room or that you think of. Like and check, is that true? That in relation to any one object, you can divide everything else in the world into either something that's that or not that. Like definitely yes, right? Um, anyway, so that's the technique of this meditation in order to analyze. So in the first step, again, we think of a situation. Yeah, so why don't we meditate just for 5 minutes we have left. Um, and then if there's a question or two, I can answer. But so just repeat the first step again, where you think of either, you know, a situation where a sense of I strongly arises. Either you're suddenly afraid, or suddenly irritated, or suddenly someone falsely accuses you of something, or even like when you walk onto a stage and everyone's looking at you, and you feel self-conscious. The I appears very strongly. Mm. And so now the second step is to consider if that I exists in that way, the way it appears, is it true that it either has to be one with my aggregates, the collection of my body and mind, or different from them, right? Has to be either inherently one with them, or if the I inherently exists in the way it appears, the first step, it has to be either inherently one with the collection of my body and mind, or inherently different from them. There's only those two possibilities. Is that the case or not? Mm. Okay. And then, yeah, so that's the first and second step. And then the third and fourth step is that we look at each of those two possibilities and look why both of them are not possible, right? So in the third step, you look to see, well, can that I be inherently one with the body and mind? And for many reasons, no, it can't. One of the main reasons is because the collection of body and mind is a whole collection of parts. That I, it's not a collection of parts. So when that I is appearing to us in the first step, it doesn't appear like it's a collection of parts. It appears like just one homogeneous thing, right? Whereas the we think of our aggregates, it appears like it's a whole collection of parts. So if they were inherently one, they couldn't appear like two totally different ways. They would be the same thing, right? Yeah. Anyway, those reasons, there are many, many reasons why the inherently existent I, which doesn't exist, right? That's what we're trying to establish, prove that it doesn't exist. But if it existed, um, why it's not, why it can't be one with the collection of parts. So that's the third step. Then the fourth step is why it's impossible for it to be different from the collection of our body and mind. And that's the 4 points, right? So next week we'll meditate more on the third and fourth point. Last week, the way we meditated on it, we did the first step where you look at the strong sense of I arising, and then we just search through all the parts of the body and search through all the parts of the mind and end up with not being able to find it. That's a kind of simplified way to do the same meditation, right? Okay, now there's a couple minutes left if anyone has a question. Okay, no questions? Oh yeah, Denise. Sure. Mm.
Just I wanted to say that this model it's been so helpful
Mhm.
because I guess this tool it's been so good for me because I'm able to face like more emotions and be able to come back to my center. Yeah, then I wanted to share that. It's been super useful and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Yeah, that's helpful to know. Yes, Richard.
Oh, yeah, I was just not that I particularly believe or think this, but why could we not negate a soul that is maybe this third thing that is in combination with the body and mind? It seems that that's could potentially still be a possibility. Or maybe I just have to think about it a little bit more.
I mean, that's definitely, yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I mean, you should, but it's something to think about. But I mean, I think first of all, you have to clarify, well, what do you mean by soul? Like, what is that for you, right? And then how, and exactly how does that exist? And you can look at it different ways by observing, because there are, when we look for, in the first step, when we feel there's this very, palpable, real kind of I that seems to be there, right? It does feel very much like what we describe like a soul, right?
Yeah.
And the real, when we, like last week, the way we did the meditation, we searched through all the parts of the body, searched through all the parts of the mind. It's quite easy to see none of the parts of the body is the I, right? That's
Right.
relatively easy because they're physical, right? The I doesn't feel like, it doesn't appear like something physical, right? It appears like something more subtle than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we look through all the parts of the mind, it's easy to see like my thought about like what I'm going to have for breakfast or what did I do yesterday? Like that's not the I, right? And a little more difficult. There's different emotions like that they feel a bit more close to home, right? So, but those also, yeah, different emotions, they come and go, whereas the I is still there, right? Those emotions come and go. So, okay, so those are not the I. But then what comes very close, I think, to the idea of a soul is, but there's this stream of consciousness that's always there. Although there are different thoughts that arise and go and different emotions that arise and go, there's this stream of consciousness that's always there. It's there from the time we wake up. It's there all through the day. It's there as we go to sleep. It's there when we're dreaming. So it must be there all through the night, all through sleep. And there's this stream of consciousness. That one's very difficult to see. Why isn't that the I, right? And actually,
Yeah.
many of the Buddhist schools, I mean, there's different philosophical schools within Buddhism, right? Several of them, they assert that that is the I, that stream of
Mm-hmm.
consciousness that's continually there, that is kind of an inherently existent I, that by its nature is the I, right? It's only
Mm-hmm.
this highest school, which I'm trying to, explain, um,
Yeah.
that rejects that also as being the I. But I think when we think of like a soul, it's kind of like that. It's like that stream,
Mm-hmm.
that very subtle stream of consciousness that's always present, right? Um, but then, yeah, but that's a very important question to look at, is like, well, isn't that the I? Like, why or
Hmm.
why not, right? But one helpful way to look at it is to compare sometimes just, and now I'm going a bit over time. Sorry, I'll stop in a second. But sometimes just look at that stream of consciousness as it's arising in the present moment. Try to imagine, how I mean, remember and imagine how it's where it comes from in the past, where it's going to in the future, and then compare that to the first step that we're looking at, when a strong sense of I arises. And do they seem like the same thing? You can see like they don't. No, when the I strongly that sense of I strongly arises, when we kind of feel this quite strong ego arising, it's not like a subtle stream of consciousness appears at that time. No. Yeah, what appears there is some more fundamental kind of just I. No, it's very different from this subtle stream of consciousness, right? And so the question is, well, that I that appears, where is that? Like, what is that? How does it exist? No. Anyway, so that's your homework. Look at that.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't leave more time for questions. Next week I'll try to leave more time for questions. But next week we'll just continue with this meditation, the 4-point analysis, or it's also called I think the diamond slivers reasoning or something. Anyway, let's just dedicate briefly by whatever merit we've created. May we and all sentient beings be free from the suffering and the cause of suffering, especially the root cause of suffering, the ignorance in not understanding how we exist, how others exist, and thereby not caring as much about ourselves or as much about others as we should in a wholesome way. And yeah, and may whatever we've done here become a cause for the well-being and happiness of ourselves and all other sentient beings in the world. And then bring to mind any other prayers you'd like to make. Mm. And so may all your own virtuous prayers be accomplished. Okay. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you, Geshe-la.